Erev Tov, Rabotai. Interesting passage brought down in the Midrash Rabbi. One time they say, that Adrianus, right, who was the Caesar of Rome, one of the Caesars. So, these Caesars, these kings always, they like chokhmah, they like wisdom, whatever. So they come to the rabbis, and they ask them questions, they have discussions with them. This happens very often. So what happened was he came to one of the chachamim of that generation, and he asked Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananiah. This was his name. So he asked him a question. He says, it says in your Torah that there's going to be tchiyat hametim, right? Resurrection. The dead are going to be resurrected. So he says, tell me something. He says, from where is God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, going to resurrect the dead? From which part of the body is going to resurrect the dead? This is what he asked the rabbi. So what happened was, right, that the rabbi told him, he says, I'll tell you, no problem. He says, there's a bone over here, right, in the back of the neck, right? It's in the spine. What is it called, this? Luz. It's one of the names, right? It's also called niskoi. It's another name it has also, right? Different names. Same thing. So he tells him, he said, that's where the bone is, from that bone, Hashem rebuilds the whole body, resurrection. This is what happens. So, this guy, right, he's he's not a Jew, so he doesn't have much emunah. He doesn't believe so much. He doesn't have emunah. These people they don't have emunah, these people. So, he asks him, he says, can you prove to me, that's true? In other words, he doesn't believe it so much, Why this bone? Why? What's the, So the rabbi tells him, he says, I'm going to show you why. I'll show you. I'll give you a demonstration. So what does he do? He brings one of these bones, and he brings it there. So the first thing, he tells him, okay, he says, you want to soak it in water, see if it dissolves this bone? So they soaked it in water, didn't dissolve, stayed, right? Okay. So then he tells him, he says, okay, what do you want to do next? Bring a grinder, right? And let's see if you can grind it. So he brings a grinder, and he starts to grind the bone, doesn't grind, comes out same as it was before. Can't touch it, right? So then he tells them, okay, what do you want to do next? Do you want to try to burn it? Make a fire, put it in the fire. Let's see if it burns. Bach. Right? So they put it in the fire, comes out, no burn, nothing. Nothing like that, right? So then he tells them, okay, what else do you want to do? You want to try something else? So he says, what about, let's put, an anvil, with a hammer, right? And let's see if you can break it, bah, 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 like this, Let's see if you can break it. So you know what happened, right? He tried to break the bone by hitting it like this. So you know what happened, right? The anvil and the mallet, they broke, but the bone stayed whole. He couldn't break it with. he broke the whole assembly there, but the bone stayed full. So he tells him, he says, now you see why I told you this bone is indestructible. You cannot destroy it. So you see from there, right? It's made to last. They say, by the way, that this bone also in the kever, in the grave, doesn't rot. Never, it stays there forever. Right? Everlasting, Never rots, never goes away, never disintegrates, nothing. So I told him, he says, you wanted to see? Okay, now I showed you, right? So, that's what you have to do sometimes, with a person like this, with a goy. They don't have emunah. When I write my Divrei Torah, on the Facebook, I post it over there. The ones who ask the most crazy questions, who they are, right? The goyim, Why? Because they don't believe these things, they're always skeptical, Everything is like, what? Where? How do you prove this? How do you prove that? How do you prove this? They don't have emunah, They don't have emunah in nothing. They don't believe nothing, these people. That's the way they are. So this Caesar was the same as this guy, right? That's the idea. Another interesting thing I want to tell you, that it says in the Gemara, Masechet Gitin, Daf Zayin. It's not really related to this issue, but anyway, it says over there, right? Haro'eh shemizanotav metzumtzamim yarbe b'hem tzedakah. That's what it says, right? What does this mean? If somebody sees, right, that his parnasah is not so good, very metzumtzam. You know how it is, right? Some people have this problem. When they have to go shopping, for Shabbat in the supermarket, whatever, they're not sure if they have enough money, Yeah, it's gonna cost $200. I have only $195. So he's worried about that $5, So he's thinking, okay, what should I remove? I have to remove something. I don't have $200. He doesn't have $200. So he has to remove something there. That shows, right, that a person is living like this. He doesn't have enough money for Shabbat. That shows, right, that his mazal, his mezonot is not so good. So comes the Gemara and tells you, you may think, right, I'm going to tell you, you know what, if you don't have enough mezonot, spend less, be more frugal, right? No, comes and tells you, no, don't be frugal. Use that money, give it to tzedakah. Why? Because a person who has bad mazal, his tikkun is what? To give more tzedakah. Because this overcomes the mazal. We talked about this right before, that the mazal is hard to overcome. Right? It's hard, difficult. It's hard to overcome the mazal. But, as we said, right, as our friend said over here, sometimes, there are segulot written in the Talmud and in the Chazal. If you do this, it'll give you long life, right? It'll give you, this longevity. Here, this is also something like that, right? Tells you the Gemara, if you have a bad mazal with your money, the way to solve the problem is to give more. You know what I mean? So now, why this way? That's the question, right? The answer is because it's very hard. It's not logical. It goes against logic, lichora. You know what I mean? What, I don't have enough, I should give more? Then I'm going to have less. What does that mean? No, you don't understand. If you give more, you're going to have more, not less. That's the whole thing, So you want to overcome the mazal? You want to be tzaddik, chassid? Oh, this is the way you do it, right? Make sure you give more. This way the mazal will be overcome, right? Mukhra. That's an interesting thing, right? Tell you another thing, which I saw. This is a halakha that was asked to me by somebody. The question is like this. Not related to this topic. Again, right? Different topic. I'm giving you today 3 different topics. Not related one to the other. The question is like this, right? Unfortunately, I know women, Jewish ladies, who are living here, there in America, all kinds of places, and they're married with goyim, or they have a boyfriend, who's a goy. You know what I mean? Husband or boyfriend, whatever it is. And I always try to tell them, I tell them, listen, this is not for you, you got to leave this guy and go with a Jewish guy. What are you doing with a goy? So, the question is like this, right? As we said, there are women like this, who have this problem today. A lot of women, unfortunately, are going with goyim. This is terrible. What can I do, right? So, the question is like this. If a woman, right, is married to a Jewish guy, but she had an affair with a goy. Understand? This happens today, unfortunately. You know what I mean? Lo exactly. It happens. Right? So, the question is, are the children, if the children came from this goy, right, the child, is the child a mamzer or not? That's the question.
Of course, mamzer.
Huh? That's the question. Right? So the truth is, that generally the rule is like this. If a woman is married, okay, Jewish woman, and she had relations with another guy, if the child came from him, so the child is a mamzer. So you would think, right, the same thing also over here. What's the difference, right? Doesn't matter whether he's Jewish or not Jewish. The truth is, it says in halakha not like that. It says in Shulchan Aruch that if the guy who cheated, with the woman was a goy, even though this lady is married to a Jewish guy, the child is not a mamzer. Not a mamzer. Kosher. The child is kosher. Jewish and kosher. The only limitation that the child has, if it's a girl, right? She's not allowed to marry a Kohen. Be careful. Not allowed to marry a Kohen.
What's that? Are you talking about the lady, the goy?
No, the lady is Jewish.
The lady.
Husband is Jewish, right? But there's a boyfriend, who's not Jewish, right? So that's what we're talking about, right?
If she was married.
So she's married. Yeah, she's married. So there, right? Even though she's married, the child is not a mamzer because the boyfriend was a goy. Understand? So it's a kosher. It cannot marry Kohen, as we said. That's one thing. Another question is like this, right? A similar question, which is, what about if the lady is married to a goy, a Jewish woman? We have this today,
Yeah, what?
And married to a goy. So, what about if now this lady went with somebody else? Cheated on this guy, on her goy husband, right? The question is, what about the child that she has now with the other guy?
Mamzer.
That's the question, right? Mamzer, no mamzer.
Mamzer, yeah.
So here's the thing, right? It doesn't matter, by the way, whether this guy was Jewish or not Jewish. It's the same thing. What do I mean to tell you? Let me ask you a question now, right? When a Jewish woman marries a goy, does the marriage really take effect according to halakha? Is she really married? No. Right? Why? Because you cannot marry a goy. No such a thing like that. Even if you went, you walk down the aisle, and da 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 da. Doesn't really matter all these things. What do you think? They gave you, some kind of contract. If you marry a goy, it doesn't take effect. It doesn't work. So therefore, right? It's not really called that you're married with him in this sense. So therefore, if this lady now, right, after marrying the goy, went with some other guy, whether he was Jewish or not Jewish, that child for sure is not a mamzer. Why? Because she's not married. Understand? That's the whole thing. She's not married to nobody. You cannot marry a goy. No such a thing like that. I want to tell you one more thing. We're going to stop in 2 minutes. Yeah.
Regarding the episode, in Torah there is a episode like that one of the Shulamit's boy, remember the story?
Yeah, that story. Yeah.
They didn't recognize him as a Jew.
Do you see the question that he's asking?
Whole story
Yeah, this is a very interesting story, right? So the story goes like this, right? That this lady, had relations with an Egyptian guy, over there in Egypt, in Mitzrayim. He snuck in, to her bedroom when the husband was gone, and she thought that it was her husband.
Oh.
You understand? So she had relations with him. So a child came from there. You know what I mean? So what happened was, right, this child, when he was trying to, find his place in the machanot, right, in the camps, in the midbar, the problem is every machaneh was telling him, you don't belong with us, go somewhere else, go there, go there. This one telling him, no, don't come here. Go over there. This one's telling him, no, don't come here. Go there. So this kid is, this poor kid, he's like, confused. He's like, what's going on? Nobody's letting me in. So he thought, this is the whole thing, right? What happened over there?
He was from the tribe of Dan.
Right, his mother was from Dan.
Right.
You understand? So he thought, since his mother is from Dan, I'm going to go to Dan. Right, I'll go to Dan. So what happened? He went there. They told him, no, you foolish boy. Right? It doesn't go by the mother. It goes by the father. Your father was a goy. It doesn't go by the mother, the tribe. It goes by the father. So this is what was going on there. You understand? Not that they were telling him he's not Jewish. He doesn't belong to any of the shvatim. This is the problem. You know what I mean? This was the problem there.
But
He doesn't belong to any shevet.
they kept them for so many years.
Well, I don't know what to tell you, but, the bottom line is that he wasn't allowed to be in the camp of any of the tribes. Because he doesn't belong there.
Moshe was 20 years old.
So what?
when
He was
killed
outsider?
Now listen to this.
Yeah.
Moshe was 20 years old when he killed that guy who slept with Shulamit. And then he was like 60 years after when they came out.
Right. Right.
At about 60, 61 years old.
Right. But when they left Mitzrayim, the thing is, they had to be each one by the Shevet.
Right.
But also, there was another place over there in the Midbar. You know what it was? A general place, right, for all the Psulim, the ones who are not kosher, not kosher Jews. Erev Rav, right, all kinds of things like this. He probably was over there, and then he tried to move in to the, to the Shevet, this Shevet, that Shevet. They told him, no, sir, out. In the end, they killed him. Why? Because he cursed God. This is why they killed him. Not because he was going in here trespassing. Not because of that they killed him. He cursed God. He cursed God, yeah. Why? Because he said, what kind of God are you, You don't allow me to go anywhere. I can't go here, I can't go there. Where am I going to go?
You got despair.
He got despair, yeah, he got upset. So,
there is Instagram influencer, Georgian guy. You heard
I'm
of
sorry,
him?
what happened?
Influencer on Instagram,
Oh.
Georgian guy.
Oh,
He cursed God,
oh.
and he's in coma now.
Where is he?
Coma.
Shem Yerachem, what can I tell you?
Yeah, sure, man.
That's a very big sin, So anyway, right, as we said, so she's not married to nobody, that's the thing, But in one sense, what I want to say is like this, right? You're not considered to be married to nobody if you're married to a goy. You're single. But since you married him, you have the sin of marrying a goy, That you'd have. You sinned by marrying a goy. So they charge you for the sin of being married to a goy. They punish you for that. But on the other hand, right, when it comes to general law, you're not married, you're single. You know what I mean? Because the marriage doesn't take effect. So it's like a dichotomy, with this. Okay, ברוך ה' לעולם, אמן ואמן. רבי חנין כמו שאומר, עשה הקדוש ברוך הוא לזכר ישראל, לפיכך ירבה להם תורה ומצוות שנאמר אדוני חפש, למען צדקו יגדיל תורה וידיר.